Lucas was the first to hear the distant footsteps. He pulled Maya closer, his hand tightening around hers as they crouched in the alley. The darkness of the night pressed against their skin like a heavy blanket, the cold biting into their bones. He could feel the hunger gnawing at his stomach, but it wasn't the hunger that kept him alert. It was the fear of being seen, the fear of being caught. Maya, her face pale and worn from days of wandering the streets, glanced up at him. Her dark eyes were wide, filled with a mixture of terror and determination. "Do you think they'll see us?" she whispered. "I don't know," Lucas muttered, scanning the narrow passage between the rundown buildings. "But we stay hidden, we wait. We can't risk it." They crouched deeper into the shadows, the wet ground pressing into their knees. The noise from the approaching footsteps grew louder, closer. Lucas's heart raced in his chest. They weren't alone. The sound of a car engine rumbled in the distance, followed by the faint voices of men laughing, shouting. A group of street thugs, no doubt, looking for trouble, perhaps for someone like them. Lucas felt the anxiety building in his chest. The city was unforgiving, and they were invisible, just another face in the crowd of forgotten children. Beside him, Maya shivered. She pulled her jacket tighter around her, but it offered little comfort against the bitter cold. "I don't want to stay out here," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if they come for us again?" Lucas didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. They had been through so much already, and the worst part was that they had nothing left. No family, no home, just the cold streets and the fear that followed them wherever they went. Then, as if fate had a twisted sense of humor, the footsteps stopped. A shadow fell across the alley, and Lucas's pulse quickened. He glanced at Maya, and without a word, they both pressed themselves deeper into the alley's recess. They couldn't afford to be seen. The footsteps resumed, now moving away from them. Lucas exhaled, his muscles relaxing slightly. They were safe for now. Maya's voice cut through the silence. "Do you think we'll ever get out of here? Get away from all this?" Lucas hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know, but he had to believe it. They had to believe that there was a way out. If they didn't, they'd never survive. "I don't know," he said softly, his voice filled with a rare vulnerability. "But we keep moving forward. We have to." The cold city air wrapped around them like a predator, but at least they were together. That was all they had. Together, they could face whatever the world threw at them, even if that meant running and hiding in the shadows. The chapter ends as they slip deeper into the alley, ready to keep moving. There was no stopping, no rest, only survival. The alley seemed to stretch on forever, a dark maze of crumbling brick walls and discarded refuse. As Lucas and Maya crept further into the city's heart, the sound of their footsteps seemed to echo in the emptiness, magnifying their isolation. Sofia's soft breath tickled the back of Lucas's neck as she clung to him, her small hands gripping his sleeve. Gabriel, ever silent, walked behind them, his eyes flickering with a mix of fear and something else, a sense of resignation, as if he had already accepted that the world was too big, too dangerous for them to make it out of alive. For a moment, they stopped to catch their breath, hiding behind a broken fence that barely kept out the noise of the street. The cold wind bit at their faces, and the faint stench of garbage mixed with the scent of rain in the air. They hadn't eaten in nearly 2 days. The hunger clawed at their insides, gnawing at their will to keep moving. Lucas wiped the rain from his forehead and looked at Maya. "We need to find food, anything, even scraps." Maya nodded, but didn't say anything. She was thinking of the same thing. How long could they keep going without something to eat? How long could they survive in a world that had already forgotten them? Then, a sound reached their ears, a soft voice calling out from the shadows. "You look like you could use a meal." Startled, Lucas spun around, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't heard anyone approach. But as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he saw her, a woman, maybe in her late 50s, with graying hair and a worn coat that looked like it had seen better days. She was leaning against the brick wall, watching them with calm eyes, as though she wasn't worried about the dangers of the city. Maya tensed, instinctively pulling Sofia closer to. "Who are you?" Lucas asked warily, his hand instinctively reaching for the small knife he kept in his pocket. "Easy there, kid," the woman said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you." I've seen you kids wandering around. It's dangerous out here. You can't trust everyone, but some of us are still trying to help." Lucas hesitated but lowered his hand, sensing that the woman wasn't a threat. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. No one offered help for free in this part of the city. "What do you want from us?" he asked, suspicion thick in his voice. She smiled, though it was a sad kind of smile, one that seemed worn out by years of hardship. "Nothing. Just some company and a bit of food. You look like you could use it." After a long pause, Lucas exchanged a look with Maya. They couldn't afford to turn down food, no matter who was offering it. And the woman didn't seem like she had any intention of leading them into danger. Slowly, he nodded. "All right," he said, his voice a little softer. "We'll come with you." The woman led them down a narrow alley and into a small, dimly lit shop that smelled of stale bread and hot coffee. The warmth hit them like a wave, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Lucas allowed himself to relax. They were safe for now. The woman, whose name was Lena, gave them warm soup and some bread. It wasn't much, but it was enough to ease the hunger that had consumed them for so long. As they ate, Lena sat across from them, studying each of their faces with a quiet understanding. "Where are you headed?" she asked, breaking the silence. Lucas hesitated. He didn't have an answer. They didn't have a destination, a plan, or any real hope of finding one. They were just drifting, lost in the currents of a world that didn't care about them. "Anywhere," Maya muttered, her voice bitter. "Anywhere but here." Lena didn't say anything for a long time. She simply stared into the distance, her eyes clouded with memories of her own past. Finally, she spoke again. "You should know," she said quietly. "This city doesn't let go of people like you. It eats them alive if they don't find a way out. Then what do we do?" Gabriel's voice cut through the conversation, his quiet words heavy with frustration. "Where do we go?" Lena looked at him, her gaze soft but filled with years of experience. "Find a place to be. Find a place where they can't touch you anymore. If you keep running, you'll never stop. You'll always be looking over your shoulder." Her words hung in the air, heavy and true. For a moment, no one spoke. Lucas felt the weight of what she was saying. They were never going to be safe just running from one place to the next. They had to fight back, find a way to take control of their lives. "Thank you," Lucas said finally, his voice firm. "We'll find a way. We'll get out of here." Lena nodded, offering them one last sad smile before they left the warmth of the shop and stepped back into the cold streets. They didn't know where they were going, but for the first time in a long while, they had something to hold on to, a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make it out of this. The city seemed to hold its breath as the children stepped back into the street, the cold biting at their skin. The warmth from Lena's shop faded with each step they took away from it. For a moment, Lucas could almost believe things might be different. A small spark of hope had ignited, but deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. Hope, in a place like this, was always fleeting. They walked in silence, each of them caught in their own thoughts. The shadows of the city were long, stretching across cracked sidewalks and desolate streets. It felt like the night was closing in around them, and Lucas couldn't help but feel like they were running out of time. "What now?" Maya asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly would draw attention to them. "Do we trust her? Do we go somewhere else?" Lucas sighed, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "I don't know, but we can't just stay out here. We need somewhere to lay low for a while, somewhere they won't find us. We can't keep running forever," Gabriel muttered, his voice dark, heavy. "I'm tired of running." Lucas turned to him, but before he could respond, a loud crash echoed through the alley ahead. The sound of metal scraping against concrete made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He motioned for the others to stop, and they froze in place, holding their breaths. The alley was dark, but from the faint light of the street lamp, Lucas could see the silhouette of a figure standing near the dumpster. His heart pounded in his chest as he instinctively reached for the knife in his pocket. "Stay close," Lucas whispered to Maya and Sofia. Gabriel didn't need to be told twice. He moved quickly to their side, his body tense. They crept forward, careful to stay in the shadows, their footsteps barely making a sound. The figure ahead of them turned, revealing a man ragged, dirty, his face covered in a thick stubble. He was staring at them, his eyes cold and calculating, like he had been waiting for them all along. "Lost little lambs in the big city," the man said with a sneer. His voice was rough, like gravel being scraped together. "You look like you could use a little company." Lucas's grip on the knife tightened. There was something wrong about this man. He wasn't just a stranger. He was a threat, and a dangerous one at that. He wasn't here to help. The man took a slow step forward, his eyes flicking between Lucas, Maya, and Gabriel. "I don't suppose you have any money, do you? Or maybe you've got something more valuable." His smile was unsettled, full of malice. Maya stepped back, pulling Sofia with her, and Lucas instinctively moved to protect them, positioning himself between the man and the others. He didn't know what this man wanted, but he was sure they couldn't afford to find out. "I think you should move along," Lucas said, his voice low but steady. He couldn't let fear show. He had to keep them safe. The man's smile widened, but there was no amusement in it. "You think you can stop me?" he asked, his voice suddenly darker. "I'm not the one you should be worried about. The city belongs to the vultures now, and you're just wandering through their territory." The words hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. The vultures. They were the ones who ran this part of the city, a gang of ruthless criminals who made the lives of people like them a living hell. Lucas had heard stories of what they did to kids who crossed their path, and now it seemed they had found them. "I don't care about the vultures," Lucas said, his voice growing more forceful. "But if you don't get out of our way, I will make you." For a moment, the man seemed to consider this. Then, with a sudden, jerky movement, he pulled something from his jacket, a knife. It glinted in the dim light, its sharp edge reflecting the faint glow of the street lamps. "I was hoping you'd say that," he growled, stepping closer. Before Lucas could react, the man lunged forward, the knife aimed straight at him. Time seemed too slow. Lucas barely had time to register the movement before he was instinctively sidestepping, using his shoulder to push the man off balance. The blade missed him by inches, but the momentum threw the man off his feet. Maya screamed as the man crashed to the ground, his knife sliding away from his reach. Without thinking, Lucas grabbed it, his fingers wrapping tightly around the handle. He turned, facing the man who was now scrambling to his feet, and for a split second, he saw the panic in the man's eyes. "I told you to. Stay out of our way," Lucas said, his voice cold. The man's eyes flickered, calculating his next move. For a moment, Lucas thought he might try to fight back, but instead, the man's gaze shifted, and he spat on the ground. "You think you can take on the vultures?" The man sneered, wiping blood from his lip. "You won't last long in this city. Nobody does." Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the shadows, his footsteps fading into the night. The tension in the air didn't dissipate. Immediately, Lucas stood still, the knife still clutched in his hand. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was a certain relief in the stillness. They had escaped him for now, but the warning was clear. They were being hunted. Maya was the first to speak, her voice shaking. "What now?" "We keep moving," Lucas said, finally lowering the knife. "We can't stay here, but we're not giving up." Gabriel nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Let's go." And with that, they disappeared into the darkness. Once more, the city's shadows swallowing them whole. But this time, Lucas knew something had changed. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting back. The city was a maze of alleys, broken sidewalks, and crumbling buildings that seemed to close in on them with every turn. The children moved quickly, their senses heightened, always looking over their shoulders. The warning from the man lingered in Lucas's mind. The vultures. The last thing he wanted was to find out what they were truly capable of. They walked for hours, avoiding the main streets, ducking into shadows whenever they heard footsteps, always staying just one step ahead. But the weight of their situation was sinking in. They had no plan, no real place to go. They were just wandering, surviving on scraps and what little goodwill they could find. Maya, her face pale with exhaustion, finally spoke up. "Where are we going, Lucas?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, just tired. "We can't keep running forever. We need a place to stay. We need something." Lucas sighed, rubbing his face. "I don't know, Maya, but we'll figure it out." We always do. We can't always do this. Gabriel muttered under his breath, his voice low but sharp. You saw that man back there. He wasn't just a stranger. He knew who we were. He's right, this city belongs to the vultures now. Sofia, walking close to Lucas, squeezed his hand. Her small, delicate fingers felt so fragile, yet in that moment, they were the most real thing he could hold on to. We'll be fine, Lucas said, but the words felt hollow. He wasn't sure he believed them himself anymore. They had managed to escape that man, but they hadn't shaken the feeling that the vultures were always watching. A moment of silence fell over them. The streets felt even emptier now, as if the city itself had abandoned them, leaving only the shadows to chase them. And then, as they rounded a corner, they saw it, a small, run-down building with a faded sign reading, "Safe House." The words seemed almost too good to be true. Maya looked up, her eyes hopeful but cautious. Should we check it out? Lucas glanced around. It felt like a trap. No place in the city was ever as good as it seemed. Still, they were tired, and they couldn't keep running. Not like this. They needed rest. Let's see what's inside, he said, his voice steady despite the unease in his chest. They pushed open the door, the hinges creaking with age. Inside, the room was dark, but there was a faint light coming from the back. The air smelled stale, but there was something else, to a hint of food. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make them pause. An older man stood behind a counter at the back, his face hidden in shadow. He looked up when they entered, his expression unreadable. "What do you want?" His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. Lucas hesitated, but then took a step forward. "We're looking for a place to stay, just for the night. We don't have much, but we can work for food." The man's eyes narrowed as he studied them, then glanced at the door behind him, as if considering whether to let them in. After a long pause, he finally spoke. "Food's one thing," he said, his tone cold. "But if you're looking for a roof, that'll cost you more than you think." Lucas exchanged a look with Maya. The man was clearly suspicious, and Lucas wasn't sure what kind of deal he was about to offer. But they didn't have much choice. "How much?" Lucas asked, cautiously, trying to keep his voice steady. The man leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You'll have to prove yourselves first. The vultures don't take kindly to outsiders in their territory. If you want to stay here, you have to show me you can hold your own." Lucas's gut tightened. The vultures again. The last thing he wanted was to get involved in some kind of gang war, but they were already too deep in the city to back out now. He nodded slowly. "What do you need us to do?" The man grinned, but there was no warmth in it. "There's a shipment coming through tonight. It's going to pass near here. I want you to intercept it. Show the vultures that you can handle yourselves." Lucas stared at him, trying to read the man's face. He was offering a dangerous deal, a chance to stay in exchange for putting themselves in harm's way. But what choice did they have? They couldn't keep running forever. "We'll do it," Lucas said, his voice firm. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, but he knew there was no other way. The man's grin widened. "Good. I'll show you where to meet the others. Get ready. You're going to need it." The room felt colder now. The tension between them thickened as the man led them to the back of the building and out into another alley. A group of rough-looking individuals stood waiting. They looked as suspicious as the man behind the counter, and none of them smiled. One of them, a tall woman with a scar running down her cheek, stepped forward and eyed them with distaste. "You sure you want to do this, kids?" she asked, her voice low and dangerous. Lucas nodded, trying to ignore the pit that had formed in his stomach. "We don't have a choice." The woman didn't respond. Instead, she handed him a map and a gun. The weight of it in his hands felt foreign, and he hesitated for a moment. But there was no turning back now. They had agreed to the deal. They had to follow through. "Let's move," the woman said. The night had begun to close in, and the air seemed to thicken with the uncertainty of what was to come. The children, though scared, had no other choice. Their survival depended on this. They would either make it through or be swallowed whole by the city's endless darkness. As they followed the woman through the alley, the sounds of the city became distant. Ahead of them, the glow of a truck's headlights appeared on the horizon. The time had come to take the risk. The night air grew colder as they crouched behind a row of rusted dumpsters. their eyes fixed on the faint glow of headlights approaching from the distance. Lucas's hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the weight of the situation. They had crossed into unknown territory, and every instinct screamed at him to back out, to turn around and run. But there was no going back now. They were already into deep. Maya, her face shadowed by the dim light, clutched her jacket tightly. She glanced over at Lucas, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She was scared, but she wasn't backing down. They couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. Gabriel stood next to them, his face unreadable. His usual silence seemed heavier tonight, as if his mind was far away. Lucas knew that the boy was battling with his own demons, but this wasn't the time to push him. They all had their burdens to carry, and right now, they were carrying each other. Sofia, standing close to Maya, was the youngest, but there was something fierce in her eyes. She didn't fully understand the dangers they faced, but she knew enough to sense the shift in the air. She had learned to read the faces of those around her, and she could feel the tension in Lucas's posture, in Maya's clenched fists. "We move in when I give the signal." The woman from earlier whose name they learned was Rita, whispered sharply, her eyes scanning the area. "Stay low, stay quiet, and don't do anything stupid." Lucas nodded, his heart hammering in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was the adrenaline or the fear gnawing at him, but he felt the sharp edge of reality sink in. This was it. They were about to cross a line that could change everything for them, either for better or worse. The truck's headlights grew brighter as it drew closer, its engine rumbling in the silence of the night. A convoy of 2 trucks, one loaded with goods, the other packed with vultures, their enemies, the ones who ruled the city, the ones who terrorized anyone weaker than themselves. Lucas had seen enough of their cruelty to know that there was no mercy in them. But this was their chance. A chance to prove they weren't just victims of the streets. The convoy slowed as it reached the intersection up ahead. It was nearly time. Rita signaled for them to move. Go. With a final glance at each other, Lucas, Maya, Gabriel, and Sofia followed Rita as she led them through the shadows. They moved quickly, silently, their feet barely making a sound on the cracked pavement. The vultures, it seemed, weren't paying attention. Too confident in their control, too sure of their power. As they neared the intersection, Rita dropped to a crouch, signaling the children to do the same. The truck was right ahead, slowing to turn a corner. They had one shot, one chance. The moment felt like it stretched for eternity. Lucas's heart was pounding in his ears, and his palms were slick with sweat. He swallowed hard, trying to calm the chaos inside him. He could feel the weight of responsibility, the weight of protecting them, of getting this right. If they failed, if they were caught, it could be the end of everything. "Now," Rita whispered. They moved like shadows. Lucas sprinted forward, his legs burning, as he dashed across the street to intercept the convoy. Behind him, Maya and Gabriel followed, their movements fluid and synchronized. Sofia, though scared, held tightly to Maya's hand, running when she did, staying as close as possible. The truck turned the corner, its tires squealing as it slowed even more, unaware of the children's presence. At the perfect moment, Rita darted into the street, positioning herself to block the path. Lucas wasn't sure if she had planned it this way, or if it was instinct, but she was close enough now. The convoy couldn't stop in time. With a loud crash, the front of the truck collided with a pile of debris Rita had set up, spilling boxes and crates onto the street. The vultures in the second truck jumped out, guns in hand, their faces twisted in surprise and rage. "Go," Rita shouted, pushing Lucas toward the pile of crates. "We need to take them out fast." Lucas didn't hesitate. His body moved on its own, his training from the streets kicking in. He grabbed a wooden plank from the debris and swung it at one of the vultures, knocking him to the ground. Gabriel followed suit, using his size to his advantage, tackling another vulture to the pavement. Maya and Sofia were behind them, ducking to avoid the gunfire that cracked through the night air. The vultures were scrambling, trying to regain control, but the element of surprise was on their side. One of the vultures, a tall, muscular man with a scar across his face, charged at Lucas, swinging a metal rod. Lucas barely managed to dodge the blow, but the force knocked him off balance. He hit the ground hard, his breath knocked out of him. He reached for the knife he had kept hidden in his pocket and lunged forward, slashing at man's arm. The vulture howled in pain, dropping the rod. Lucas scrambled to his feet, his hands shaking, adrenaline flooding his system. He wasn't sure if they were winning or if they were just buying time, but he knew one thing for sure: they couldn't stop. Not now, not when they had a chance to change everything. The battle raged on, but soon the vultures realized they were outnumbered. The children, with Rita's help, had taken them by surprise, and the convoy was in disarray. The remaining vultures retreated, running down the alleyways, leaving their weapons behind. Breathing heavily, Lucas surveyed the scene. The truck was still there, its cargo scattered across the road. Boxes of supplies, things they could use, things that could give them a chance to survive a little longer. "Take what you can carry," Rita ordered, wiping blood from her lip. "We've got to move before more show up." Lucas nodded, his mind racing. They had just taken on the vultures and won. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something other than fear. Hope. They weren't powerless anymore. They had the strength to stand up for themselves. As the children hurried to grab what they could, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The vultures would come back, but now they knew what they were capable of. The truck sat abandoned in the middle of the street, its cargo scattered across the pavement like a forgotten treasure. The crates, torn open in the chaos, revealed food, blankets, and tools items that could mean the difference between survival and death. Lucas breathed heavily, still shaken from the fight, but there was a sense of urgency in his movements now. They needed to gather what they could before the vultures regrouped. Maya was already at the truck, quickly collecting the food, her hands trembling but determined. Gabriel was beside her, his usual silence replaced by an intensity Lucas hadn't seen before. Even Sofia, though clearly overwhelmed by the violence she had just witnessed, helped in her own way, picking up smaller items and carrying them back to a safe spot. "We can't stay here long," Rita said, her voice steady despite the blood dripping from a gash on her forehead. "The vultures won't be gone for good. We need to move before they come back with reinforcements." Lucas nodded, scanning the street. The fight had attracted attention, but no one else seemed to be around. The quiet of the city felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. They were alive, but Lucas knew that wasn't enough. They couldn't afford to stop now, not when they had a chance to make things better, to build something they could call their own. "We need a plan," he said, his voice firm. "A place to stay, somewhere we can rest." Rita looked at him, her eyes calculating. "You think it's that easy? The city's not kind to people like you. You'll find shelter, but there's a price. Trust me." Lucas didn't like the way she said it. He didn't like the idea that everything came with a price, that even their survival had strings attached. But they didn't have time to argue. "Where's the safest place?" he asked. Rita hesitated, glancing around before speaking again, her voice lowered. "There's a place, a shelter, run by someone who doesn't take kindly to the vultures. But it's far from here. We'll need to keep our heads down if we want to get there without drawing attention." Maya paused, looking up from the supplies she was packing into her bag. "How far?" "Too far to walk safely in a single night," Rita said, "but we'll have to risk it. There's a hideout nearby we can use for the night, but it's a one-time thing. After that, we go to the shelter." Lucas considered her words. They didn't have many options. The shelter was their best chance for safety, but getting there was going to be a challenge. The vultures wouldn't let them slip away that easily, and if they kept moving through the city like this, it was only a matter of time before they were found. "All right," Lucas said, gathering what little was left in the truck. "We'll follow you." The group moved quickly, darting through back alleys and avoiding the main roads. The shadows seemed to grow longer with each step, as if the city itself was closing in on them. It was impossible to ignore the feeling that they were being watched, and Lucas found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder, ready for anything. The hideout Rita led them to was a small rundown building on the outskirts of the city, tucked away behind an abandoned warehouse. It looked like the kind of place no one would ever look twice at. The walls were cracked, the windows covered in grime, but inside, it was safe for now. They huddled in the corner, the dim light from a single lamp casting long shadows across the room. The silence between them was thick, the kind of silence that comes after a battle, when everyone is too exhausted to speak, too drained to process what had just happened. Lucas couldn't stop thinking about the fight, about the way he had reacted so quickly, instinctively, when the vulture had come at him with that knife. He had felt a surge of power then, a feeling of control he hadn't known he was capable of. But now, in the quiet, it all seemed hollow. They had won this battle, but there was no telling what the next one would look like. Maya was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "What now? We can't keep living like this, always looking over our shoulders. There has to be something more than just surviving." Lucas looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. He knew what she meant. They couldn't just survive forever. They needed a future, a place where they didn't have to fight for every meal, where they didn't have to hide from every shadow. But he also knew the harsh reality. The vultures weren't going to let them go that easily. The city was a beast, and they were just scraps in its jaws, struggling to stay afloat. Gabriel spoke next, his voice quieter than usual, but there was a rawness to it. "We've been running our whole lives, and it's never been enough. Maybe it's time to stop running." Lucas looked at him, surprised. Gabriel rarely spoke of his past, of the things that haunted him, but tonight it seemed like his walls were crumbling. There was something vulnerable in his voice that Lucas hadn't heard before. "Stop running?" Maya repeated, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Gabriel looked down, his hands clenched tightly in his lap. "What if we don't have to run anymore? What if we stand and fight? We have a chance to do something more than just survive. Maybe it's time to make our stand." The words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Lucas felt the weight of them. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. They had a chance to reclaim something, to reclaim their lives. But it would come with a price. Every choice did. "We'll have to be ready for whatever comes next," Lucas said finally, his voice steady. "But I think Gabriel's right. We can't keep hiding. We've got to take control of our future." The group sat in silence, contemplating what this new path meant. They had come so far, and they had fought so hard just to survive. But now, they were faced with the most difficult question of all. What would they do with their survival? The road ahead was uncertain, and the dangers they faced were still very real. But for the first time, they weren't just running from their past. They were looking forward toward something greater. The hideout was silent except for the faint sound of the wind slipping through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. Outside, the city never truly slept, but here, in this forgotten corner of the world, the children finally had a moment to breathe. It wouldn't last. Lucas sat near the entrance, his back against the cold wall, eyes fixed on the darkness outside. His fingers absent-mindedly traced the hilt of the knife he had taken from the vulture. He had never imagined himself holding a weapon before, much less using one. But things were different now. They weren't just running anymore, they were fighting for the right to exist. Behind him, Maya and Gabriel were going through the supplies they had managed to take from the truck. A few cans of food, some blankets, medical supplies, things that could keep them going for a while. Sofia sat beside them, her small hands gripping a half-eaten piece of bread. As she watched them work, "We can't stay here," Maya finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rita said the shelter is safer, but it's far. We'll need a real plan if we're going to make it there without getting caught." Gabriel scoffed. "And what if the shelter isn't any better than the streets? What if it's just another trap?" Maya shot him a glare, but she didn't argue. The truth was, none of them knew what waited. Lucas sighed, rubbing his temples. "We don't have many choices. If we stay here too long, the vultures will find us. If we go back to the streets, we won't last. The shelter might not be perfect, but it's our best shot." A long silence followed. Then Sofia spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't want to run anymore." Her words hit harder than any of them expected. Lucas looked at her, really looked at her. She had always been the smallest, the quietest, but she wasn't weak. She had seen more than any child should, endured more than she deserved. And now, even she was tired of hiding. He nodded. "Then we fight." Maya frowned. "Fight how?" "We make sure that wherever we go next, it's on our terms," Lucas said. "No more waiting for things to get worse. We choose our next move. If we go to the shelter, we do it with a plan. We learn the city. We find out what the vultures are afraid of, and we use it." Gabriel raised an eyebrow. You're talking about taking on the vultures. Just the four of us. Lucas met his gaze. No, I'm talking about making sure no one controls us ever again. The words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. For so long, they had been running, hiding, surviving. But Lucas was done being afraid. They had proven they could fight. Now, it was time to figure out how to win. Rita entered the room then, her expression unreadable. She had been gone for over an hour, scouting the area to make sure they hadn't been followed. Looks clear for now, she said, but there was something in her tone that made Lucas uneasy. Maya noticed it too. What aren't you telling us? Rita hesitated, then sighed. The vultures aren't backing down. They're looking for you harder than ever. Word on the street is, they want to make an example out of you. Lucas clenched his fists. He had expected this. The moment they had fought back, they had crossed a line. The vultures wouldn't stop until they found them. Gabriel cursed under his breath. So much for laying low. Rita leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You kids need to decide now. If you go to that shelter, you'll have protection for a while. But if you stay out here, you better be ready for war. Lucas looked around at the others. Maya, always ready for a fight. Gabriel, struggling between fear and fury. Sofia, brave in ways none of them had been prepared for. They weren't just lost kids anymore. They were survivors. We go to the shelter, Lucas said finally, but not as scared kids looking for safety. We go as people who refuse to be owned by this city. Rita studied him for a long moment before nodding. All right, but if you want to survive, you'll have to learn fast. Because the vultures aren't going to let you walk away that easily. Lucas already knew that, and he was ready. Dawn painted the sky in soft hues of pink and orange as the children stepped out of the hideout, their bodies sore, their minds sharper than ever. The city, despite its early morning quiet, felt heavier, as if it knew they were trying to escape its grasp. Lucas adjusted the straps of his backpack, now filled with stolen supplies. Maya kept Sofia close, her grip protected. Gabriel walked in silence, his hands shoved into his pockets, his thoughts locked away. And Rita led the way, her steps quick and confident, guiding them toward the shelter that could change everything. The streets aren't safe this morning, she muttered, glancing back at them. The vultures know you're out here. We need to stay in the alleys. Lucas nodded. The events of the previous night had set something in motion, something they couldn't take back. They had fought back, and now the vultures wanted them to pay for it. They moved quickly, slipping through the narrow veins of the city, ducking behind dumpsters and broken fences. The sound of their footsteps was barely a whisper against the damp pavement, but every now and then, Lucas would catch a glimpse of something figures watching from balconies, a car slowing just a little too much at the corner, the distant murmur of voices through the cracks of buildings. The city was watching. Sofia's fingers curled tighter around Maya's sleeve. They know, don't they? She whispered. Yes, Maya admitted, but we won't let them take us. They turned down a deserted alley, its walls covered in graffiti and old posters peeling away like dead skin. Rita stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Lucas held his breath. Footsteps. Not theirs. Maya pulled Sofia closer. Gabriel reached into his pocket, fingers tightening around, something probably the small pocket knife he had taken from the supply crates. Lucas's pulse quickened. The footsteps grew louder. Then, from around the corner, a boy emerged. He was their age, maybe a little older, with wild dark hair and sharp eyes. His clothes were ragged, but there was something familiar in his stance, the way he carried himself like someone who had seen too much and trusted too little. Lucas's stomach twisted. He knew that face. Raphael, the boy who had betrayed them. Maya stiffened beside him. Gabriel muttered a curse under his breath. Sofia, unaware of who he was, simply stared, sensing the tension in the air. Raphael took a slow step forward, raising his hands in mock surrender. Relax, he said, his voice too casual. I'm not here to fight. Lucas's jaw clenched. Then why are you here? Raphael tilted his head, his eyes flickering toward Rita before settling back on Lucas. I heard you were making a move. Thought I'd see for myself if it was true. Why do you care? Maya spat. Raphael exhaled, shoving his hands into his pockets. Because, he said slowly, If you're serious about taking a stand, you're gonna need more than just 4 kids and a washed-up fighter. Rita's expression darkened, but she didn't interrupt. Lucas didn't trust Raphael, not after the last time. He had led them into a trap before, but something about his words made Lucas hesitate. "We don't need your help," he said, though he wasn't sure if that was true. Raphael smirked. "You sure about that?" Lucas didn't answer because he wasn't. The silence stretched between them until Rita finally spoke. "We don't have time for this. If we don't move now, we won't make it to the shelter before the vultures find us." Raphael grinned. "Then let's move." Lucas glared at him. "You're not coming with us." Raphael raised an eyebrow. "I think you'll change your mind." Lucas wanted to argue, but there was no time. The vultures were closing in, and whether he liked it or not, Raphael was right. About one thing, they weren't strong enough to win this fight alone. With a reluctant nod, Lucas turned and led the way. The shelter was waiting, and so was whatever came next. The air was thick with tension as they moved through the alleys, Raphael trailing just behind them like a shadow that refused to disappear. Lucas kept glancing over his shoulder, waiting for any sign that Raphael was about to betray them again. But the older boy said nothing. He just followed, his hands in his pockets, his gaze sharp and unreadable. Maya was rigid beside him, her grip on Sofia never loosening. Gabriel, too, walked with stiff shoulders, his fingers twitching near the knife hidden in his pocket. They all remembered what Raphael had done before, and none of them trusted him now. Still, they had bigger problems. Rita led them deeper into the city, weaving through back streets that smelled of damp concrete and stale garbage. The sun was beginning to rise, casting an eerie golden light over the rooftops. "We're close," Rita muttered. "If we move fast, we can get inside before." A loud whistle cut through the silence. Lucas's blood ran cold. It was a signal. Maya spun around. "They found us." From the rooftops, from the alley behind them, from the street ahead, figures emerged, all wearing the same ragged, patched-up clothes. The vultures. Lucas cursed under his breath. There were too many of them. A tall man stepped forward, his face hidden under the brim of a worn-out hat. "You really thought you could run, didn't you?" His voice was smooth, almost amused. Rita took a step in front of the kids. "Back off, Hector." Lucas tensed. She knew him. Hector chuckled. "I told you, Rita, you should have stayed out of this. These kids, they're nothing. Just another set of nobodies thinking they can change the rules." He turned his gaze to Lucas. "But you made a mistake when you fought back." Lucas's fists clenched. "We're not afraid of you." Hector smiled, slow and dangerous. "You should be." Then he snapped his fingers. The vultures lunged. Everything happened at once. Maya yanked Sofia behind her as Gabriel swung his knife at the first attacker. Rita moved fast, knocking one vulture to the ground with a brutal kick. Lucas barely had time to react before someone grabbed him from behind. He twisted, using all his strength to break free, but the vultures were stronger. Then, suddenly, Raphael moved. With quick, practiced precision, he grabbed a loose brick from the ground and slammed it into one of the vultures' faces. The man crumpled instantly. Lucas barely had time to register what had happened before Raphael turned to him. "Run." Now, Lucas didn't hesitate. Grabbing Maya's wrist, he pulled her forward. Gabriel was already shoving another vulture away, dragging Sofia with. Rita fought like she had nothing to lose, her movements precise and lethal, buying them time. The alley ahead was open, their only chance. Lucas sprinted, heart pounding, lungs burning. He could hear the footsteps behind them, the shouts, the chaos, but the shelter was close. Then, just as they reached the edge of the alley, a gunshot. Lucas turned just in time to see Rita stagger. Maya screamed. Rita clutched her side, blood staining her shirt, but she didn't stop moving. She pushed Lucas forward. "Go," she gasped. Lucas grabbed Sofia, yanking her ahead as Gabriel and Maya followed. They burst onto a quiet street, the shelter right there, an old, crumbling building with heavy metal doors. Raphael slammed his fist against it. "Open up." For a second, nothing happened. Then, the doors creaked open, and a pair of cautious eyes peeked out. "We need help," Raphael demanded. Now, the person hesitated, then yanked the door open wider. Get in. They stumbled inside, breathing hard, Rita leaning heavily against Lucas. The doors slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside. The shelter was dark, quiet, a safe haven for now. Lucas looked at Raphael, breathing hard. Why did you help us? Raphael wiped blood from his lip and smirked. Because you're the only idiots in this city crazy enough to fight back. Lucas wasn't sure if that was a good thing. The inside of the shelter was cold, a stark contrast to the warmth of the city streets they had left behind. The walls were bare, the floors concrete, the air thick with the scent of mildew and old wood. But it was safe, at least for now. Lucas quickly helped Rita to one of the nearby benches, her breath shallow, her face pale. The gunshot wound wasn't deep, but the blood was still pouring, soaking her shirt. Maya knelt beside her, her hands trembling as she applied pressure to the wound. You need to rest, Maya whispered, her voice strained. We need to stop the bleeding. Rita grimaced, but shook her head. I'll be fine, she said through gritted teeth. But we don't have much time. Lucas moved quickly, grabbing whatever medical supplies they had managed to steal from the truck. He wasn't an expert, but he had seen enough to know how to stop the bleeding, at least for a while. He glanced up at Raphael, who was standing near the door, keeping watch. You didn't have to help us, Lucas said, his voice low. Why did you? Raphael didn't immediately answer. He was watching the street through the small window in the door, his expression unreadable. Finally, he turned around and shrugged. I've seen what happens when you try to run for too long, he said quietly. You either die or get caught. I'd rather not let that happen to you. Lucas wasn't sure if he believed it. Raphael's motives were still a mystery. He had helped them, yes, but that didn't mean he was their ally. He had betrayed them once, and Lucas couldn't forget that. Why are you helping now? Lucas pressed, his eyes narrowing. What's in it for you? Raphael smirked. What's in it for me? Maybe it's just watching you all try to make something of yourselves. It's amusing, he paused. Or maybe I owe it to you. Lucas didn't have time to process his words. Maya was still working on Rita, trying to stem the bleeding, her face tight with concentration. Lucas moved closer to help her, glancing over at Sofia, who was sitting quietly in the corner, her face pale from everything they had just been through. How's she doing? Maya asked, her voice shaking with concern as she finished wrapping the wound with a clean cloth. She's stable for now, Lucas replied, his voice steady. But we need to get her some real medical help. We can't stay here long. Rita, who had been silent for a while, let out a soft chuckle. You think I'll let you leave that easily? Lucas looked at her in surprise. You won't make it far without a plan, Rita continued, her voice thick with exhaustion. I've seen it happen 1,000 times. Kids like you running around thinking they can just outrun everything. But this city, it doesn't let go. Not ever. Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. The city was a beast, and they were just prey. But something had changed in Lucas. He wasn't afraid anymore. He had fought back, and he had won. They had a chance. So what's the plan? He asked, his voice firm. Rita looked at him, her eyes sharp. First, you get rid of the vultures. And then, you fight to stay alive. It's not easy. It never is. She paused, glancing around at the group. You think you're ready? Lucas hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were fighting for something more. I'm ready, he said, his voice unwavering. Maya looked up from Rita's wound, her eyes meeting his. We're ready. Gabriel nodded in agreement, his eyes sharp with focus. And Sofia, despite her age, her voice was steady. We have to do this. Rita smiled, though it was a sad, tired smile. You'll need help, but you've got the right attitude. She turned to Raphael. You in? Raphael smirked, his eyes glinting with a mix of amusement and something darker. Of course, I'm in. What else would I be doing? Lucas didn't trust him, not completely. But right now, they didn't have many options. You know what this means, right? Lucas said, looking around at each of them. This isn't just about surviving anymore. It's about taking control of our lives. Rita nodded. Exactly. The moment felt heavy, the weight of their decision sinking in. They weren't just running from the vultures anymore. They were fighting back, carving out a place. in a world that had never been kind to them. It was a long road ahead, but for the first time, Lucas felt like they had a chance. The shelter felt too quiet, the silence oppressive in a way that gnawed at Lucas's nerves. He hadn't felt safe since they'd entered the city, and now, even in the relative safety of the building, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the moment they let their guard down, it would all come crashing down around them. Rita paced the room, her eyes constantly darting to the windows, her body stiff from the wound she had taken. Despite the blood loss, she moved with an urgency that reminded Lucas of the way a trapped animal acted, fighting against its own fear, unwilling to admit that it had nowhere to go. "We need to hit them first," Rita said, breaking the silence. "The vultures will be hunting you down. If we wait for them, they'll take us out one by one." Gabriel was seated near the door, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. He didn't speak much, but Lucas could see the tension in his body, the way he kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting trouble. "How do we even start?" Maya asked, standing by the table, looking at the map Rita had laid out. "They've got more people, more guns. We're just kids. We don't have what it takes. You've got something more powerful than all their weapons combined," Rita said, turning to face Maya. "You've got the will to survive. That's all you need." But Lucas knew it wasn't enough. No amount of willpower could stop a bullet, and they weren't just fighting against the vultures, they were fighting the entire city, the system that had already failed them. The odds were stacked against them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and no matter how much they fought, they would always be the underdogs. Still, Lucas wasn't going to let them give up. Not now. He had made a promise to them, to Maya, to Sofia, to himself. He wasn't going to let them fall back into the shadows. Not again. "We can't just charge in blindly," Lucas said, his voice steady. "We need a plan. We hit them where it hurts, take out their resources, their supply lines, cut them off from the city, make them fight to survive. If they have to worry about their own survival, they'll stop looking for us." Rita nodded slowly. "You're right. They'll never see it coming. We hit them fast, before they can react." Maya glanced at Lucas, her eyes filled with doubt. "And you think we can do that? You saw what happened last night. We're more than that," Lucas interrupted, his voice sharp. "We're not just running anymore. We can do this. We have to do this." Gabriel stood up, his face hardening, the weight of the situation settling in. "It's not just about survival anymore. It's about taking back control. We've been living in fear for too long." Sofia, who had been silent up until this point, walked over to Lucas, her small hands reaching for his. Her eyes, though filled with innocence, had a maturity beyond her years. "We can do it, Lucas," she said quietly. "We've already survived everything else. We can survive this too." Lucas looked down at her, feeling the weight of her words. She was right. They had already survived more than most people could even imagine. They had a chance to fight back, and not just for survival, but for a future. "All right," Lucas said, his voice steady now. "We do this, but we do it smart. We strike first. We don't wait for them to find us." Rita smiled, though it was thin and grim. "That's the spirit. We'll get you ready. And once we take down the vultures, we take down the whole system. We get what's ours." Lucas felt a flicker of hope within him. The vultures thought they controlled everything, but they had underestimated the people they had thrown away. The kids, the outcasts, the survivors. It was their time now. The air felt different now, charged with anticipation. After weeks of hiding, of constantly looking over their shoulders, Lucas finally felt like they had a chance to take control of their own fate. The vultures had ruled the streets for too long, and it was time they learned that not everyone would kneel to their power. Rita, though weakened from her wound, had become a fierce mentor. She spent hours teaching the children how to navigate the city, how to blend in with the crowds, how to move with purpose and precision. They learned the best places to hide, how to track their enemies without being seen, and most importantly, how to take down their supply lines without getting caught. Rita had set up a meeting with a few people from the underground network. She trusted people who had once fought against the vultures themselves, before they were either killed or driven into hiding. They were all hardened, their faces marked with the kind of pain Lucas had come to know far too well. But in their eyes, there was something else, something that Lucas hadn't seen before, a spark of hope. "It's time," Rita said, her voice firm as she stood in front of them. "We're not just going after food or money this time. We're going for their weapons, their resources. We hit them hard and fast. We make them bleed." Lucas felt the adrenaline rush through him as he nodded. "We're ready." Maya glanced at him, her usual calm demeanor replaced with a sharp intensity. "Where do we start?" Rita pointed to the map that had been spread out before them. "There's a weapons cache 2 blocks from here. It's guarded, but it's also the weakest of their supply lines. We hit them there first. Once we take it, we use it to our advantage." Lucas looked at the map, his mind racing. They had to act fast. The vultures would be looking for them after last night's fight, and they had to make sure the vultures didn't know where to strike back. "We need to split up," Lucas said. "We can't go in all at once. We'll take the guard positions and cover each other." Rita nodded approvingly. "Smart. We'll move fast. In and out." Plan was set. They gathered their makeshift weapons, knives, bricks, and whatever they could use to defend themselves. With each passing minute, the tension grew. Lucas's stomach churned, not from fear, but from the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about taking control of their lives, about showing the city that they were no longer invisible. Maya was the first to move, her face set in determination. She had become the fastest of the group, her agility allowing her to slip through the streets unnoticed. Lucas followed, his heart pounding in his chest, but his steps sure. Gabriel and Sofia were close behind, their eyes sharp, each step calculated. The closer they got to the weapons cache, the more the air seemed to thicken. The city was alive with sounds, the hum of distant conversation, the screech of a bus on its tracks, the occasional rumble of car engines. But there was something different in the air tonight. They were moving with purpose now. There was no more running. 2 guards ahead, Rita whispered, her voice low. She had taken the lead, using her experience to get them to the perfect spot. "I'll take the left, you take the right. The rest of you, wait for the signal." Lucas nodded, his eyes scanning the area. The guards were positioned outside an abandoned warehouse, talking casually, completely unaware of the danger closing in on them. With a deep breath, Lucas moved into position. He could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about the fight in front of them. This was about everything that had led them here, the abandonment, the fear, the endless days spent running. Now they had the chance to change their story. Rita gave the signal. In a blur of motion, Lucas darted toward the guard on the right, grabbing him by the neck and slamming him against the wall. The guard struggled, but Lucas's grip was tight, forcing him into unconsciousness. At the same time, Rita incapacitated the other guard with a swift punch to the throat, knocking him to the ground with a quiet thud. The street was silent again. Maya, Gabriel, and Sofia moved in quickly, sweeping the area to make sure the coast was clear. They worked like a well-oiled machine, their movements swift and practiced. With the guards taken care of, they moved into the warehouse, the door creaking open with ease. Inside, crates of weapons were stacked high, there, cold metal glinting under the dim light. Lucas couldn't help but feel a rush of exhilaration. They had done it. They had taken the first step in changing their fate. "We've got what we came for," Rita said, her voice filled with a quiet triumph. "Now, let's get out of here before anyone notices." But as they began to load the crates, Lucas felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He could hear it before he saw it, the sound of distant footsteps, growing louder with each passing second. The vultures were on their way. "We need to move now," Lucas shouted, his heart racing. The children grabbed as much as they could carry and sprinted back into the streets, adrenaline flooding their bodies. The vultures would know they were here soon enough. They had to get out before it was too late. As they disappeared into the shadows, Lucas felt a surge of hope of something more than survival. They had done the impossible. They had taken the first step toward reclaiming their lives. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. They didn't stop running until the shelter was in sight, the weight of the crates they carried almost forgotten in the face of the growing danger. Lucas could hear the vultures' shouts echoing through the streets, their voices frantic as they realized what had happened. They had hit the vultures where it hurt, taking their weapon, their lifeblood. The adrenaline from the heist still surged through Lucas's veins, but beneath it, he felt a deeper, more dangerous emotion, fear. The city had changed overnight. They had broken the rules, and now they had to face the consequences. The shelter loomed ahead, its iron doors a symbol of temporary safety. Rita moved ahead, leading the group through the back alleys, her face set in grim determination. They had been through so much, and yet the hardest part was still to come. When they finally arrived, the door creaked open, revealing a room full of people, some familiar, others strangers, all with eyes that told stories of their own battles. This was where they would be safe for a while, but Lucas knew it wouldn't be long before the vultures came after them. They placed the crates down in the corner, their contents still heavy in Lucas's hands. "We did it," Maya said, her voice shaky but proud. She looked at him, her eyes full of a fierce kind of gratitude, but Lucas couldn't quite shake the feeling of dread gnawing at his gut. Rita turned to him, her face shadowed with concern. "They won't let this go. The vultures never forget a blow like this. They'll come after us, harder than before." Lucas nodded, knowing she was right. He had no illusions about what came next. They had taken a step toward their freedom, but at a price. The group sat in the corner, taking a moment to catch their breath. Gabriel, always the quiet one, spoke up. "What now?" His voice was quieter than usual, the weight of their actions settling in his bones. "We prepare," Rita said, her tone unwavering. "They won't stop until they make an example of you. And when they come, we fight back, but we do it smart. We learn the city. We learn who we can trust." The room fell into silence again. Lucas glanced around at the faces of the children, his family. They had come so far. They had fought and won, but at what cost? "They'll come for us," Maya said, her voice firm. "But we won't back down." Sofia, sitting beside her, reached out and took her hand. "We'll stick together," she said quietly. Her words were simple, but they held the power of everything they had been through. Lucas stood up, moving toward the window. He could see the first light of dawn breaking through the buildings. The city was awakening, and so was their fight. Rita joined him at the window, watching the streets with a keen eye. "The vultures don't know who they're messing with," she muttered. "You four have something most people don't. Your will to survive. It's a dangerous thing." Lucas turned to her, "And it's not just about surviving anymore. We're taking control of our future. We're not running from them or anyone." Rita smirked, a rare hint of approval in her eyes. "I like that. But remember, survival isn't just about fighting. It's about learning how to live in a world that's trying to break you." "I think we've learned that already," Lucas said, his voice steady. Sofia looked up at him, her eyes wide with an understanding that was beyond her years. "We can make it, right, Lucas?" For a moment, Lucas didn't answer. He thought about the battles ahead, the vultures, the system that had cast them aside, the fight that would take everything from them. But he had learned something in the streets, something that had become a part of him. If they wanted a chance, they had to fight for it. "We can make it," he said finally, his voice steady. "We'll fight for what's ours. And we won't stop until we've taken it." A cheer erupted from the others. The tension in the room lifted just slightly, the air thick with resolve that had brought them here. Rita looked at him, a new respect in her gaze. "You've got the right fire in you, kid. Let's see how far you're willing to take it." They didn't speak for the rest of the night. The vultures were out there, and they knew it. But for the first time, they felt something more than fear. They felt power. The fight wasn't over, but Lucas knew that whatever came next, they weren't backing down. They had survived this far, and together, they would survive whatever came next. The next few days felt like a blur. The shelter had become a temporary haven, but Lucas knew it couldn't last forever. Every creak of the building, every unfamiliar sound sent their nerves on edge. The vultures were out there. They were always out there. The group spent hours training, learning the streets, learning how to move unnoticed, how to use their surroundings to their advantage. They practiced with the weapons they had stolen, knives, makeshift clubs, and anything else they could get their hands on. Rita had taught them how to use what they had, how to strike fast and without hesitation. But there was one thing that none of them could practice: the fear. The fear of being caught, the fear of losing what little they had left. Sofia had nightmares, clutching Maya tightly in her sleep. Gabriel, once so silent and calm, was now full of barely contained rage. He sparred with Lucas, using his anger to fuel his movements, but there was something hollow in his strikes. It was clear that Gabriel wasn't just fighting the vultures. He was fighting himself. The days passed, and the group prepared for what they knew was coming. They gathered what they could from the city: food, supplies, anything that could help them fight back. The city had turned into a battleground, and they were no longer bystanders. They were players in a game that had never been theirs to begin with. But with every plan, there was always a risk. They had taken down one of the vultures' supply caches, and they knew that would make them a target. The question now wasn't whether they could survive the attack. The question was how many more days they had before they had to make their stand. It came sooner than they expected. Lucas was standing guard near the back of the shelter when he heard the distant rumble of trucks. His heart jumped into his throat. He didn't need to see the vehicles to know what they were. The vultures. Everyone now, he shouted, his voice sharp with urgency. He sprinted toward the others, but they were already moving. They had trained for this moment. They knew what to do. Rita was at the front, already preparing to lead them. Get ready. They're here. Lucas's pulse hammered in his ears as he grabbed his makeshift weapon. He had never felt more alive, more terrified than he did in that moment. The city was their battlefield, but this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming their place in a world that had abandoned them. They gathered by the back door of the shelter, each of them taking their position. Raphael stood nearby, his eyes cold but focused. He had been a part of the plan, but Lucas still didn't know whether to trust him fully. He had helped them before, but what would he do when it really came down to it? The trucks skidded to a stop in front of the shelter. The vultures disembarked, their movements slow but sure, as if they owned the city. They had no idea what they were walking into. We can't wait for them to get too close, Rita said, her voice firm. We take them out fast and hit them hard. Now, the first vulture stepped into the alley, and that's when it happened. A barrage of rocks, bricks, and makeshift weapons rained down on them. Rita led the charge, a flash of steel as she tackled the first vulture to the ground, disarming him in seconds. Lucas, adrenaline coursing through his veins, rushed forward, using the knife he had taken from one of the vultures earlier. He moved with precision, his hands steady despite the fear gnawing at him. Maya was a blur beside him, her speed and agility giving her an edge as she incapacitated another vulture with a swift kick. Gabriel fought like a man possessed, his anger and frustration driving him to move faster, harder. But there was a darkness in his eyes, something that terrified Lucas more than the vultures ever could. Sofia, though small, had her own way of fighting. She was quick, darting between the chaos, taking advantage of every moment to disarm the vultures and help take them down. But the battle wasn't easy. The vultures were skilled, their movements calculated, and they didn't give up easily. One of them fired a shot, narrowly missing Lucas. He ducked behind a crate, his heart pounding in his chest. We need to fall back, Rita yelled. Get to the secondary exit. Now, the children, exhausted and battered, scrambled to retreat, but the vultures were closing in. The moment of victory they had dreamed of felt, like it was slipping away. Move, Lucas shouted, grabbing Sofia by the arm and pulling her toward the exit. They ran. They ran because they had no other choice. Every step, every breath felt like a weight pressing down on them. The vultures were relentless, but they couldn't give up now, not when they had come so far. They burst into the open, the cold air of the city hitting their faces like a slap. The vultures were still hot on their heels, but Lucas could see it now. They were not the prey anymore. They were the hunters. They were the ones who had taken control. We don't stop, Rita said, gasping for breath. We keep moving. We take the fight to them. Lucas looked around at his makeshift family. They were bruised, beaten, but they were still standing. They were alive, and as long as they were, they would never stop fighting. The sounds of pursuit faded into the background as they turned the corner and ducked into a narrow alley, the adrenaline pumping through their veins. Lucas's heart was still racing, his thoughts moving faster than his legs could carry him. They had just fought back, taken what they could from the vultures, and now they were on the move again, unsure of what came next. But they weren't running anymore. They weren't afraid of the vultures anymore. We need a plan, Maya said, breathless. She wiped the sweat from her forehead, looking around at the others. We can't just keep moving in circles. We need to end this. Lucas didn't disagree. They had been running, hiding, surviving, but it was time to stop. The vultures had made their move. Now it was their turn. We find their heart, Lucas said, his voice steady as he looked each of them in the eye. We go to where they're most vulnerable, the heart of their operation. We hit them hard, and we don't stop until they know we're not running anymore. Gabriel, who had been unusually quiet, looked up from the ground. His eyes were sharp now, filled with a quiet rage. How do we even get close enough? They'll have the whole city looking for us. Rita, who had been watching silently from a distance, stepped forward. Her wound had healed, but the strain of everything was written across her face. We'll need to move fast, and we'll need the element of surprise. The vultures are big, but they're not invincible. We just need to be smart about it. She pulled out a map of the city they had scavenged earlier and spread it out in front of them. Here, she pointed to a district on the map, one that looked far removed from where they had been hiding. This is where their central base is located. It's fortified, but we've got enough intel to get inside. And it's close enough to the vultures' supply lines, which means it's where they keep their most important things. If we take this down, we cripple their entire operation. Lucas nodded, feeling a spark of hope. This was the chance to finish what they had started. But there was a price. I'm not going to lie, Rita said, her voice serious. This is dangerous. The vultures will be expecting us, and they'll be ready. We're talking about breaking into the heart of their operation. We'll be putting our lives on the line. Then we put everything on the line, Lucas said, his jaw set. We've come this far, and I'm not backing down now. We're doing this together. There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt. They had faced everything already, each other. The streets, the gangs, their pasts. They had nothing left to lose. Maya stepped forward, her eyes hard with determination. You're right. We've come too far to stop now. Gabriel's gaze met Lucas's, a silent understanding passing between them. We do this. We finish it. Sofia, standing a little apart from the group, her small form unwavering, nodded. We fight. We win. With that, a plan was set. They knew the risks, but they also knew what was at stake. It was more than just their lives. It was their freedom, their future. For the first time in as long as they could remember, they were in control. The night was their cover as they made their way through the city's maze of alleys and dark streets. Their movements were quick and quiet, their nerves steeled. Lucas felt the weight of their mission pressing on him. He had always been the one to lead them through danger. But this time, it was different. This time, the stakes were higher. The closer they got to the vulture's stronghold, the more tension built in his chest. He had always hated the feeling of being hunted, always hated the idea that they were prey. But now, they were the predators. They were the ones hunting. As they neared the entrance to the vulture's hideout, Lucas motioned for the group to stop. The building in front of them was large, unwelcoming, and reinforced with thick metal doors. Guards patrolled the area, but they were easy to spot. They had trained for this: how to move undetected, how to disarm, how to take down the enemies in their path without drawing attention. Rita, who had led them through countless escapes and fights, crouched beside him. You ready? She whispered. Ready, Lucas answered, his voice a mix of confidence and determination. He looked back at the others. Let's do this. With a nod, Rita signaled the others, and they moved into position, slipping into the shadows. The next few moments were a blur of movement. They took down the guards silent, one by one, their bodies falling without a sound. Lucas's heart was pounding in his chest, but his movements were controlled. They had trained for this, and now it was all coming together. They reached the entrance, where the final challenge awaited, the heavily guarded door to the vulture's inner sanctum. It was fortified, locked tight, but Lucas wasn't about to let that stop them. Gabriel, Sofia, get to the control panel, Lucas said, his voice firm. Maya, Rita, with me, together. They moved swiftly, and within minutes, Gabriel had hacked into the system, disabling the alarms. The door clicked open. They were in. The interior of the building was just as intimidating as the outside, dimly lit, cold, and sterile. They could hear the faint hum of equipment, the sounds of the vultures going about their business, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. Rita led the way, her steps silent and deliberate. They were close now, closer than they had ever been to ending the vulture's reign. The group moved deeper into the building, and Lucas could feel the weight of what they were about to do. They were on the edge of something big, something that could change everything. And then they reached it, the heart of the vulture's operation, the vault. It was time. Lucas's eyes met Rita's. This is it. Rita smiled. Time to make them pay. The vault door was massive, but with the help of the supplies they had taken from the warehouse, the group was able to break it open. The contents inside were more than enough: weapons, money, and information about the vulture's network throughout the city. This was their victory, and it had only just begun. Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.